Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube channel. I am Marvin Alquin. As always, you can find me on Twitter at @FF_MarvinE. And I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about a running back who Dynasty managers might prefer to trade away at this point in his career, but I actually think he's the perfect running back trade target for a Dynasty contender, and that's Seattle Seahawks running back Carson. We'll talk a little bit about his upside this season, his current Dynasty value, and what to expect from him going forward. All right, so when we're talking about some of the most productive running backs over the last 2 years, Carson's name might not immediately come to mind, but he's been a borderline RB1 since 2019. Among running backs with at least 10 games played over the last 2 years, he's the RB12 in PPR points per game at 15.9, RB12 in rushing yards per game at 70.8, and that's mainly driven by his heavy involvement in the Seattle Seahawks offense. He's also been the RB11 in team opportunity share, accounting for an impressive 32% of the team's total opportunities, accounted for 55% of the team's total rushing attempts, and he's also tied for RB17 in target share at 11%. So he's not an Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey, guys who account for 20% of their team's targets, but he'll give you a baseline of around 2 to 3 targets, 2 receptions per game that will further boost his fantasy floor. And in my fantasy points over expected model, he actually graded as my RB5 in 2020, averaging around 2.6 points above expected, just showing you how efficient he was with the opportunities that he received. And what I love about Carson is his consistency over the last 2 years. He's been an RB1 in 37% of his games, also a top 24 running back in 74% of his games. So in other words, he's extremely reliable. He gives you that high RB2 floor, but also an occasional RB1 upside week to week. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, he's an older running back, right? Yes, there's definitely a scenario where Carson is only productive for a very limited window at this point in his career. He is nearly 27 years old, approaching his age 27 season here. And though the odds are stacked against him, we have seen running backs actually peak later in their career and remain productive up until age 28, even though we always think about that the peak years of 23 to 26. Running backs can remain productive even after that. In fact, we've seen guys like Matt Forte, Marshawn Lynch, Mark Ingram have their best PPR per game season at ages 27 and 28. And if we do a quick age analysis here, looking at all RB1 seasons since 2000, we've seen about 10.3% of all RB1 seasons fall within the ages of 27, 9.1% fall within the ages of 28 since 2000. So those percentages are definitely lower than ages 23 to 26, where the sample size hovers around that 12 to 15%, but it's not a massive drop off starting at age 27. It's after age 28 when you really see a running back's value, production, and efficiency drop off pretty heavily. And if we look at running backs, we see a similar trend there, where 25% of all RB2 seasons since 2000 fall within the ages of 27 and 28. So while Carson might not necessarily have RB1 upside for much longer, he could still be a solid top 24 running back in your lineups for at least 2 more seasons. And so going back to my point earlier where Carson was extremely involved for this offense over the last 2 years, essentially accounting for about a third of the team's total opportunities, I believe that's exactly what we'll see here in 2021 and potentially in 2022 next season. He signed a 2-year, $10.4 million deal this offseason, just showing how committed the Seahawks are to him. Now, the Seahawks could save about $4.9 million in cap space in 2022 if they let him go, but I just don't think that will happen considering the running backs that they currently have under contract next year. They don't have many running backs under contract is the main point here. You have DJ Dallas as one of the only notable names who will still be around in 2022. And we saw glimpses of what he could be last year, right? He can be a rusher and a receiver in this offense, but he definitely wasn't as efficient as Carson on a per touch basis last year. But he is the guy likely that you want as Carson's backup. Now, Alex Collins is on a 1-year deal here as well, so he's someone we have to keep an eye on. But Rashad Penny, former first-round pick, they declined his 5th-year option earlier this year. We know he struggled with injuries, and he also recently had a procedure on the same knee that he injured in 2019. And according to injury analyst Matthew Betts at the Fantasy PT on Twitter, be sure to follow him if you don't already, but any surgical intervention on Penny's complex knee injury will only accelerate the rate of developing arthritis, according to Matthew Betts. So his chances of contributing this year and even the years beyond that are very slim. So it's clear here that the Seahawks need Chris Carson. They need him this year to be a solid producer and a key piece to this offense, and potentially even next year if DJ Dallas does not develop as they would expect. What I love about Chris Carson is his potential value at his current ADP for a Dynasty Contender. He's currently being valued as the RB22 in PPR Dynasty ADP according to the Sleeper platform. He's going behind guys like Travis Etienne, Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, understandably because those guys are younger and have a much higher upside. But I'd argue though that Carson has the higher floor in the 2021 season than any of those running backs. And as for his trade value, our Dynasty GM tool currently has Carson valued right around a 2022 first round pick. I wouldn't hesitate to trade for Carson by giving up one of those lower first round picks, especially if I'm a contender. But I don't even believe you have to spend up that much to get him. We know Chris Carson is approaching his age 27 season, as we already talked about. So if he's on a non-contending team, a team that's rebuilding, I believe you can trade for him by giving up a younger running back and maybe a second round pick or a third round pick. Think of guys like Michael Carter, Trey Sermon, someone who has more value for a rebuilding team. And Chris Carson, I believe, has a higher chance of finishing as an RB1 or even an RB2 than any of those younger running backs. And some interesting trades here involving Carson that I found on analytics of Dynasty.com. We've seen Chris Carson traded for James Robinson, for a 2022 first, which we already talked about, for Ryan Fitzpatrick in a Superflex league, for Curtis Samuel, Chase Claypool. So as you can see here, there's definitely value to be had where you can even trade for him in exchange for a middle tier wide receiver. And I believe if you're in need of a running back, Chris Carson's your guy who can give you that high baseline of production and potential upside as well. And so to sum this up, yes, Chris Carson is an older running back, but he's one of the most reliable and consistent fantasy running backs that we have in the league today, and I expect that to continue for the 2021 season. He's on a Russell Wilson-led offense surrounded by DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Gerald Everett. So if you built a team around several stud wide receivers, your dynasty team has Adams, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, and you're one running back short of being a dynasty contender this year, I believe Carson is the guy you should target because whenever he's on the field, we know he'll give you that RB1 upside with a high RB2 floor. All right, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video on Chris Carson, why I believe he's the perfect trade target for a dynasty contender. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Also check out our website. We'll be cranking out articles and content on the YouTube page as well as we help you guys prepare for the NFL season that's coming up here in a few weeks.